I'd like to conclude with a more personal question, if I may. And I was wondering, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given, either as a student here or in your route into the presidency?
No, it was from a very good friend of mine, a Jesuit priest. When I asked him, well, what is the best advice that you can give me? And he told me, well, to see clear, to feel deep, and to act efficiently.
That voice you just heard was Rafael Correa. He was the president of Ecuador for 2 terms, and he was also a graduate of the University of Illinois. Personally, I am fascinated by international politics. It's something I've spent a lot of time studying here as a student. And when I found out that the president of a major country in Latin America had graduated from here, I was really intrigued and wanted to learn more. What impact has the University of Illinois had on Latin America beyond just this one person? And what different institutions here play a role in that connection? These are the questions that I hope this podcast will at the very least scratch the surface of and hopefully get to some deeper answers on as well. We will talk about the nature of the connections between the University of Illinois and Latin America.
The reach of the university in Latin America has been very, very extensive, and the ties are pretty strong.
When relevant, we'll touch on some more explicitly political themes about Latin American politics and generally just how political ideas impact all of this.
So yes, when the PT was in the government, there were a lot of investment in terms of education and the training of the workforce. This has reduced during the Bolsonaro government, but it never ends because Brazil has very strong institutional places that fund science and technology and education, right?
And hopefully we'll be able to learn a lot from the 2 amazing guests that I was able to interview.
It therefore seems to me most important that you, the people of the state of Illinois, should know your university. Is it doing what you want it to do as the people's university? You are the owners, and your decision is final. Learning and labor. For the people and by the people. The people's university.
Welcome back to another episode of the Learning and Labor podcast. Today we're going to be talking about UIUC's connection to Latin America. And most of this episode will consist of interviews with 2 different professors who are both very important in the operations of 2 different institutions that relate to UIUC and Latin America. I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit between these 2 interviews, but it will mostly stay focused on one or the other. To start off with, we're going to hear from Professor Gisela Sin, who is the director for the Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies and an associate professor of political science. She will speak to us about her work as the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies and just generally speak on the connections between Latin America and UIUC more generally. I was also lucky to speak to Professor Flavia Andrade, who is the current acting director of the Lemann Center for Brazilian Studies. So we will also get a little bit of a look about how Brazil in particular relates to UIUC from her. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in, starting with a bit of the conversation I had with Professor Sin, and I hope you all enjoy this episode. Okay, so to get started, I guess I was just hoping you'd maybe be able to talk a little bit about yourself, just give an introduction and maybe talk about your academic background to start things off.
Yes. So my name is Gisela Sin, and I am from Argentina. In Argentina, I studied political science. I then did a master's in history. And then I came to the United States for my PhD studies. I went to the University of Michigan. And in fact, the thing I study and that I specialize are institutions. And I study Congress and how Congress operates and the processes and the rules and how it distributes powers among its members. And I also study separation of powers and the relations between the executive and the legislatures, and how they operate, and how different rules make one to be more powerful than the others, and how it differs among all the countries based on those rules and procedures. That's a lot of what I study.
That sounds really interesting. Thanks for sharing. I've studied a little bit about some of those things in my coursework, and I think it's definitely really important to look at. I guess like my next question is just kind of what brought you to the University of Illinois and the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies here.
Well, so I received an offer from the University of Illinois when I went out on the job market, and I really liked it. I like the people. The political science department is a top department in the United States. It's among probably the top 20. And then the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies is where all the things Latin America happen. And that's where, you can get support for your research. So initially, before I became director, that's where you get support for your research. You get support to develop new classes, to incorporate new elements from Latin America, where you can bring in speakers that are really important for your career, or that are doing research that is super interesting. And that's what the center is. And the center really groups all the people that study Latin America. And I found, or through the center, I met people that are interested in the same things I do, but that they work in another department. So, and also, or people that study Argentina or Brazil or Chile, etc., that we have a common interest, and we have a common language and many things. So it really is a hub for Latin America, things happening that are about Latin America on campus.
That kind of already answers my next question, which is just what is the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and what purpose does it serve? I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but
yeah, I'll add some. So what the Center for Latin American Study does is it has the objective of supporting faculty in their research on Latin America, supporting students at the University of Illinois, in the ones that are interested in Latin America, or trying to make them be interested in Latin America and the Caribbean. We also support the community of Urbana-Champaign, but more widely Central Illinois and many across the country, in, again, providing them resources and support for things about whatever they want to do or they want to learn about Latin America. And the other thing that it does is the center supports K-12 or K-14 teachers and students learning about Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have a few constituencies, which are faculty, students, K-14 students and teachers, and also the broader community.
Great, thank you. I guess one question I had is when I was talking with Professor Andrade about the Lemann Center, we talked a little bit about how it was set up and how it was funded, which is largely through an endowment from an individual donor. So I was just kind of curious how the Center for Latin American Studies compared, and how it was supported financially from the administration, or if there's any other sources.
Yes, and I'm looking just for a list where I have all the different sources that we have. But so basically, our main source of funding is the Department of Education. We have, with the Department of Education, we have a big grant, which is about more than $500,000 a year. And that provides us with money to support all of our constituency, faculty, students, teachers, students at K to 14, and also the community. And among that, we also provide, with that funding, we provide money for language fellowships and for graduate and undergraduate studies. And that's another, a lot of money that to undergrads. It provides a stipend and $10,000 for tuition, and then to graduate students, it's a full fellowship that provides tuition, a stipend, health insurance, etc. Then we have different type of grants. We have, for instance, last year we had a chancellor's call to action to address racism grant, and for which we funded a lot of our indigenous language revitalization programs. We also have an Institute for Museum and Library Services grant, a National Endowment for the Humanities. We have grants from Extension, from Illinois Extension. We have a Tinker Collaborative grant, which provides money for students to do field work in Latin America every summer. And we fund about 25, 30 students. And then we have endowments, specific endowments from previous professor that give money for specific things, for students to come and study in the United States, for students to go learn languages in Latin America, etc. So we have a variety of funding. The most important is the one from the Department of Education.
Good, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a grant that we compete. It's not, like Lemann funds with functions with an endowment that was given at some point. All of our money is what we call soft money. So we have to compete every so many years for these grants. And sometimes we are not successful and we have to reduce the amount of things we do.
Okay.
The university also is very generous as it provides stability, in the sense that most of our positions, in fact, all of our positions are funded through the university. The positions of, associate director, the instructor of Quechua, we're bringing in an instructor in Canjobal, our outreach coordinator, our office assistant, etc.
Okay, so the faculty and staff that operate the center are funded by the university, but the actual operations are from largely from this grant.
The grant. Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense. Okay, so I guess I wanted to zoom out a little bit, and I'm definitely interested in how things operate here on campus, but I'm interested in exploring this connection and the impact on Latin America as well. So I guess there is some information that I found while looking at the website for the Center of Latin American and Caribbean Studies about research in on Latin America dating back to the early 1900s. I was just wondering if you'd be able to outline what the major historical developments have been relating to UIUC's connection to Latin America and how that has had an impact.
Well, as you mentioned, in the 1949, we have the Latin American Studies major, which is unique and one of the first ones in the country. I think it's important also that, so first, the university really supported this development and the focus on Latin America by creating this major. And with that, they are, providing resources to hire faculty, etc., in the different departments. The center itself started in 1963. The center becomes the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and in fact, that's the same year in which we also win this. We become a national resource center, which means we have the denomination by the Department of Education that we are a national resource center. And this means that we won for the first time the grant money from the Department of Education that would allow the center to grow and to become what it is now. And that's very important. In fact, all of these centers, there are various centers in IGI, and all of these centers come from, after or during Cold War, there is a need to understand the world better and to create people that specialize in specific regions of the world. And that's why all these centers form, and why the Department of Education starts giving away these grants, or these grants that will allow the centers to develop, so that it would create. It would have money for faculty to specialize in Latin America and the Caribbean. It would bring in students that will specialize on that, and will also bring in students that will learn, or will provide incentives so that students learn a language, one of the languages that we teach. And in fact, that's the next stepping stone or big moment I want to emphasize, which is in the early 70s, the Quechua program is formed, and that is one of the oldest Quechua programs in the nation. So Quechua is spoken by about 10 million people in the Andes, in Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and the north of Argentina. And we have a specific instructor since then that teaches classes on Quechua during the intermediate, beginning, intermediate, and advanced. And we also have a class on life in the Andes, and we do a lot of activities like a Quechua Alliance event that we have a few weeks ago, or last year we celebrated Carnival. We had 400 people. We did it in Chicago, so that the whole Peruvian community gets together and in fact comes in, because there's a big demand for connection with their roots and with their Quechua, their Andean heritage. So that's that's another important moment. And then in 2019, the Illinois Global Institute was created, that grouped all the centers that specialize in different regions in the world. So we are now 11 centers, and one of those is the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Center.
That makes sense. I've heard a little bit about the Quechua program, and it seems to me to be a pretty great that we have that here in a fairly unique. I don't know how many other programs like that exist in the United States, but I hadn't heard much about it. I was aware that the language was a well-spoken and important language, but I felt like it hadn't been something I had been aware of in a U.S. educational context before coming here.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and it's important also. So we are. We have this Quechua Innovative and Teaching Initiative program, which is in fact a collaboration that is developing an open access Quechua book and Quechua materials. A lot of people are very interested in. We've done a survey with Quechua heritage speakers, and they really want materials to teach their children about Quechua. So this book is open, and in fact brings in all the varieties of Quechuas across the Andes. So we really try to promote cultural events and different activities. And the Quechua program is very good. The language, in fact, is the classes itself are very small. They're just about between 5 and 10 students, so you get a lot of focus from the teacher, who is a specialist in Quechua. You get a strong focus, attention, and help with the language, and also we have in the language we have this we participate in these global classrooms. So the class meets once every week or every other 2 weeks with a class in Peru, in the region of Andahuaylas, with undergrads that are learning or are studying to become teachers. So the students here who are learning Quechua meet with the students who are becoming Quechua teachers. And in fact, it's an amazing interaction, because of course, it's really great for our students to be speaking with native speakers, etc., and to do activities with them, but also for the future teachers in Peru, it's really good because they're teaching non-native speakers how to learn Quechua. So that's very good. And the fellowships, we have many fellowships for students to learn Quechua, and that's really also provides a lot of incentive for students to do it.
That makes a lot of sense. I had one other follow-up about the, you said that the grants were relating to like the time period of the Cold War. I was just wondering if you are aware of like, was there a specific piece of legislation that was pushing for this or any other thing like that?
No, so the legislation is Title VI within the appropriations and the budget for the Department of Education. So if you look at Title VI and then the international programs, you'll probably find. But that was the main. I wouldn't say to create spies, but the idea is that you create people that we know about. I think is an amazing state policy from the government. Is a time of long-term policies that I don't think exist anymore. Is this, because they were not trying to get an outcome immediately. They knew it was going to take a while, and but it's amazing because then it really created a whole. Many people that went into work for the State Department that became professors that specialize in Latin America that work in different positions in the government and in the industry that knew about it and also learn our language.
With regards to these connections that exist, I was interested in getting a little more detail about what countries in particular have a stronger connection or faculty or student presence here at UIUC, and if there's any important factors that have led to these differences that exist.
Yeah, so I think one strong connection we have is with the Andean region, and that has to do with the Department of Anthropology becoming this center to studying Andean culture and doing archaeology and doing cultural studies of the Andeans. Probably the most prominent names in the last 50 years were professors at Illinois, and you can see their legacy. For instance, if you visit the Craner Art Museum, or if you visit the Spurlock Museum, you can see the collections that they bought. Of contemporary artifacts that are there that they have donated to the university, and they in fact created amazing ties with the Andean region. We still have many of them here. And then, so that's an important, and that also explains why we taught Quechua, and because the students were studying Andean, the Andes, and needed the language skills. So that was most of the classes were taken by graduate students, and that's why, because they were here studying those topics. So I would say that that's still strong now. The other area that is pretty strong has been economics. We have had many economies across Latin America that did their PhD here. And that has to do with a professor called Werner Baer, which also was very important in the creation of the Lemann Institute. And he had been a director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. And in fact, he brought in many students from Latin America to study economics here. Imagine that before, now it's pretty simple to apply for graduate school. you go to a webpage and you find the information. But before, that was not available at all. You needed a connection. You needed to have someone in order to apply to a school. You needed to have the papers to be able to, apply. Those papers needed to be sent from the United States. You needed to send all your application materials on the mail. I still did it on the mail when I went to Michigan, and that's 2000. So imagine before, and we're talking about the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was extremely hard. So those connections of specific professors that would go to Latin America to do research and then had connections with professors in different Latin American countries who then would send their students, those were the connections that matter for coming to the United States. And you would come to where these, corridors or where these connections had been made. And in that sense, that's why we trained so many prominent economists. That's why we trained so many prominent anthropologists, for instance.
Okay, so we just heard a lot from Professor Sin about the relationships between Latin America and UIUC. And one figure that was mentioned was Werner Baer. Baer was an economist at the University of Illinois, and he played an important role in connecting the university to Latin America and specifically to Brazil, and had an important connection specifically with Jorge Lemann, who was the namesake of the Lemann Center. So to get into all of that and explore this topic a little bit more thoroughly, I'm now going to play the interview with Professor Andrade, where we talk more specifically about the relationship with Brazil and UIUC.
So my name is Flavia Andrade, and I'm a professor here at the University of Illinois since 2017. My position is now in the School of Social Work. Before, I worked in the College of Applied Health Science in the Kinesiology and Community Health Department. I'm Brazilian, and throughout these 17 years, I have connected with several scholars from Brazil. I was before part of the executive committee of the Lemann Center for Brazilian Studies. I was also part of the board for the CLACS, the Center for Latin American Studies. So throughout these years, I have already had connections with the center, even before I arrived here. I knew some of the connections with Brazil, but it's even better now because the center is completing 15 years this year. So it started in 2009, right after I joined the University of Illinois.
That's great. That makes sense. And what brought you to the University of Illinois specifically?
So I did most of my studies in Brazil. I did economics in Brazil, and then I studied population health. In 2000, I came to the United States to do my PhD in demography and sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And when I was there, I also did the Master in Public Health. After I left the University of Wisconsin, I went to University of Chicago and did my postdoc back in economics, right? Then I went to the job market, and then I landed here at the University of Illinois, and I have been here for the last 17 years.
Okay, wow, that's a lot of different places. That sounds really cool. Okay, so I think we're good to try to transition into talking about the Lemann Center a little bit. And I guess I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that, but just for some background, maybe it would be good to go over the namesake of the center. If you could maybe start off by providing that kind of background.
So our center is endowed by Jorge Paulo Lemann, who provided a gift for the University of Illinois in 2009. So if the funds from this gift is what actually generates the revenues and the income that actually we pay all the students, research activities, cultural engagement. Jorge Paulo was born in Rio de Janeiro, and he has both Brazilian and Swiss citizenship. He started his life in Brazil, but then he moved to Harvard to do his undergrad studies. And while he was at Harvard University, he met Werner Baer, who was a professor of economics here at the University of Illinois. And it was through this connection between Jorge Paulo and Professor Werner Baer that actually the center started. So it was really a personal connection that, Werner Baer talked about all the important work that he was doing in trying to bring Brazilians, especially from less developed areas from Brazil, to study here at the University of Illinois. And then Jorge Paulo contributed with the endowment. Jorge Paulo Lemann is a businessman. When he worked in banks, he created like a very important bank in Brazil, Garantia Bank. And after that, he created another company that acquired the two largest breweries in Brazil. And this became very like a big company called Ambev. And then in 2004, he bought other breweries around the world, and this became an InBev. They actually had an office in the research park for a long time here at the University of Illinois. Most recently, he created another company called 3G, and with that, he expanded the business. And so several companies like Kraft, Burger King are part of this umbrella of the 3G and continues to expand. And he was very generous to provide this endowment to the university. He comes every year to the United States. We have an event called Lemann Dialogue. This year, right now, as we speak, is being held at University in Stanford University. So he's there. He was speaking to the students yesterday. Last year, he came here to the campus because we were the hosts of the Lemann Dialogue. And so he comes, he meets with the students and faculty that are doing research about Brazil.
That makes sense. So you mentioned Stanford. Am I right that there's also similar Lemann Centers at Stanford and Columbia? And I don't know if there's other ones as well. Harvard. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So I guess it was interesting to me because when I first heard about it, I think I heard that there was these, prestigious private universities that have this, and then also the University of Illinois, which I thought was kind of cool because you might not expect. I mean, University of Illinois is a very respected research institution, but it's not always talked about in the same breath as Harvard or something like that. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, so it really started with this personal connection with Werner. But as you said, the University of Illinois is a top university. Right? We have several departments and units that are top in the United States. The other advantage that we have here is that all the other three Lemann Centers, they are more focused on specific areas like health or education. And our center is really multidisciplinary. So our center was funded in 2009. And Werner Baer, I was telling you, was this professor in the school in the economics department. And Werner Baer was really like a leader in going to Brazil and really going to universities that were less well known. And he would go personally and talk to the students and convince them to come to the US, right, to the University of Illinois. So he did this really important work, and several of his past mentees became very important politicians and high-level civil servants in Brazil. So Werner had this mission of like creating a higher-level workforce, especially at the government level in Brazil. And so he brought this to the attention of Jorge Paulo Lemann, who contributed with the funds. But our center is multidisciplinary. So it started with economics and history, so within the College of LAS, but it really branched out. And nowadays we have, you can go to our web page and look at our affiliates. We have about 90 affiliates, and these 90 affiliates are across campus. It's different from the other Lemann Centers.
Yeah, that is interesting. So we've talked about, mentioned briefly, like the connections with students and obviously professors or those involved in research and that kind of thing, connecting from Brazil to Illinois through this. But what would you be able to just specify a little bit what purpose does the center serve in terms of impacting the ability of students to study here, and what exactly, how that mechanism works in practice?
Yeah, sure. So when the center was created in 2009, the endowment actually, they had very specific guidelines on how the funds were going to be used. So every year we provide funding for 5 students as part of the Lemann graduate fellowships. So we fully funded 5 students every year. So they are Lemann graduate fellows. In addition to that, we also have Werner Baer's family providing funds for additional fellowships for what we call Werner Baer Fellows now. And we also extended this to also have postdocs. So we have Werner Baer postdocs. We also have funds that we provide for study abroad, and we haven't used these funds for like in recent years, and it was a program that we reissued this year. So students from here can also go to Brazil. So all the graduate fellowships are for students from Brazil to come and have the opportunity to study here and they're fully funded during that year to do this work. Part of the funding is also for students to go during the summer and collect data there. So this is what we have for students. But we also have funds for faculty members. And then we have two categories of grants. We have faculty grants and we have collaborative grants. So every year we have competitions, and we have the calls, and professors will apply, and we will fund them individually to do research about Brazil, and research also that professors from here collaborate with professors in Brazil. So that's another opportunity of funding that we have. We have another area of action that is like cultural events and outreach. So we provide several events that are open to the community, and they are free every year to increase the engagement and the knowledge about Brazilian culture. We'll go to schools to also spread more what we do. We also fund part of the Portuguese instruction here on campus. So one of the instructors is funded by the center. We work together with the Luso, with events for students, and they are open also for the community. We bring every year a distinguished professor from Brazil that teaches a course about Brazil. So this semester we have Professor Suzelle Riley that's teaching about musicology. Last semester we had Professor Cacheta from Exalc who taught about logistics and agriculture. So it's really varies, the topics vary from year to year. Next semester we're going to have a professor in political science. So it's really a really broad spectrum of activities. And we have almost every week, we have the Lemann lecture series that we invite professors, not only from Brazil, but professors in the United States and sometimes even in Europe or other places in the world to come and give talks here for our fellows and students and faculty.
I believe that I took a class Brazilian foreign policy with Professor Antonio Carlos Lessa, which I believe was part of this program. And that's kind of how I became interested in this, because he mentioned the center and kind of the connection with Illinois in that class, which was pretty fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah, so Professor Lessa was one of our distinguished professors. I would also think that I forgot to mention to you one program that we have that is very unique, is that as part of an agreement with Brazil, we provide funds for civil servants from the central bank to come and also do an MSP here on campus. And we used to have a program called Empower that, is phasing out now. We are redesigning it. But the idea, it was to bring students from minority and disadvantaged groups and underserved groups, we might bring different names. But these usually students from lower socioeconomic status that, unless they would have fellowships, they wouldn't become able to come. And we were able to have this bridge for a few years here at the University of Illinois.
Talking about the students that are Brazilian students here or assisted by the Lemann Center, what areas of study are most common? Are there any beyond what you mentioned? And what proportion, if you have an idea, are in these fields? I guess I was under the impression economics was a big one. Also, the undergraduate and graduate students. I guess from what you said earlier, it seems like graduate students are those supported by the Lemann Center most regularly. So I was just curious if you could elaborate on those topics.
Yeah, and I can provide you exactly the precise numbers, but last year we had 200 Brazilian scholars or students that came to the University of Illinois. If I recall correctly, the numbers, 116 were actually scholars, meaning that they were professors or postdocs that came for visits, right? We sponsor a lot of them. So imagine 116 scholars coming every year to the University of Illinois. The other 84 were students. Most of these 84 students are graduate students. Now, where are these students located? Across all campus. So if I give you the figure, you're going to see that actually it's throughout campus, because again, what happens is that because we have faculty members, like these 95 faculty members that are affiliated now, they are from all areas of expertise. They have connections in Brazil. So students from all over comes actually to have their education here. But most students are graduate students at this point. A few years back, we had a program that was very large that was called Science Without Borders. And this was a program that the University of Illinois had, but other universities in the United States also received very large numbers of Brazilian students, including undergrads, that came to campus. So at the height of the program, we had hundreds of students just in that program coming every year. Most of them actually that came were undergrads, right? And Professor Mary Arendts was actually the acting director at the time when we had the largest number of students coming for the Science Without Borders.
That's interesting. Was the Science Without Borders, what was that a part of, or what kind of caused that funding or support for that program?
Yeah, so it was the Ministry of Education, probably Science and Technology in Brazil. I don't remember exactly all the specifics, but it was based on federal government.
Okay.
Then the two main Brazilian agencies worked together, and we had massive numbers of Brazilians coming to all over the United States. But the University of Illinois was one of the main recipients. The program was along with Fulbright. So the Brazilian government collaborated with the Fulbright, and then large numbers of Brazilians came. And even though this program has ended, we went to Brazil. So in August, I went with President Quilin and a large delegation to Brazil, and we visited the the Ministry of Education. And this program, they're considering reshaping, probably renaming, but the idea is like to increase the number of Brazilians coming to the University of Illinois in the near future.
Well, that's all really interesting. I have a few more questions about that, if that's okay. So
Sure.
Could you may have mentioned it, but just to clarify when this program started and when it ended approximately?
So the Science Without Borders was a government scholarship program that encourages students to study science, technology, engineering, mathematics abroad. So the program was established in 2011.
Okay,
right?
Cool.
There were approximately, so you have an idea of the scope. In the United States was not the only country receiving Brazilians, but the largest number probably came to the US was 100,000. Approximately 100,000 students came. So it was a very large one.
And that delegation you said was in 2015. I'm sure I could probably find a press release or something about
the delegation I went with President Clinton was August 2023.
Oh, 23. Sorry, I totally misheard. Okay, cool. So was President Clinton, yourself, others, I assume, just okay.
Jared Davila, that was the director of IGI, Professor Pedro Halal, that is the director of the MPH program, Mary Arendts Kuning, that's the acting dean in the College of ACES, Jay Walsh, Nick, but the dean also of the College of Medicine, Mark Rosenblatt at UIC. There were like Pradeep Khanna from the Illinois Foundation. Yeah, I can't even remember, probably. Oh, I can have here the list just by chance.
Cool.
So Jay Walsh, that is the President for Economic Development and Innovation. Nicholas Jones, the Executive Vice President and Vice President for Academic Affairs. Mark Rosenblatt, the Dean of the College of Medicine, University of Illinois, Chicago. Brooke Weisenbeck, the Vice President for Presidential Development Initiatives. Pradeep Khanna, Associate Vice President for International Engagement. Professor Jared Davila, Executive Director of IGI, myself, and Pedro Halal.
Okay, and then you met with the Ministry of Education. Is that the primary?
No, we went to 20 institutions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a very intense week. We visit major universities like USP, University of São Paulo, PUC-Rio, INSPER. We visit like major partners in Brazil, like Embrapa, Embrapi, CNPq, the S system. It was a long trip.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot. Including the Ministry of Education, among others. Yeah, we went to many places, Nico.
I'm curious if like these programs or exchanges have like changed over time based on developments in Brazil. At least from what I'm familiar with, I imagine there were probably different approaches to education with the PT government versus the Bolsonaro government, for example. And I'm just curious to what extent that affected anything with these exchanges or anything like that.
Yeah, so For the center, a lot of our activities are based actually on the endowment, right? So they're pretty constant. What varies are the other additional programs that we can receive students based on, funding from the Ministry of Education through like CAPES, NPQ, or other like state agencies like FAPESP, right? Or there's like all the states have, but the main one is called FAPESP in São Paulo. So these things will change over time. FAPESP probably is like a more constant source of funding because it's based on the tax, part of the tax revenue. So they have a more constant source of funding. Now, when you go to the federal level, the funding varies depending on the government, right? And this has clear impacts and implications for the number of students that actually can go abroad. Different governments also have different focuses, right, on what they want to expand and will be, what they want to leave as legacies. So yes, when the PT was in the government, there were a lot of investment in terms of education and the training of the workforce. This has reduced during the Bolsonaro government. But it never ends because Brazil has very strong institutional places that fund science and technology and education, right? So funding can reduce, and so this may impact the number of people, but never goes away. It's not that it's going to end because it's really part of the Brazilian DNA to have these exchanges with the rest of the world in terms of science, technology, and workforce development. But it does have an impact. So now that the government has changed it again, that's when we reinitiated these conversations because this government is more open to actually have higher investments in social issues, including education.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks. So I guess to circle back a little bit to the experience of Brazilian students and scholars here on campus, I guess I was wondering if there's any particular challenges you can speak to with that studying at UIUC. I imagine obviously there's some common experiences with different international students, finding a community, a language, barriers, that kind of thing. But I was wondering if there's anything you think was particularly unique or important for those from Brazil who come to campus here.
The weather.
That makes sense.
Right? It's so different when you think it's so much colder.
Yeah.
This, especially in the first year, impact a lot of students, right? Because
Right.
you're in a different community, you speak in a different language, you're trying to recreate your, social networks, you're stressed with like your studies and like the prospects of your future, right? And then the weather gets cold, right? So I hear from a lot of students saying, because Brazil is a warmer climate, and especially when the weather changes here, sometimes the students go much more indoors, and the Brazilian culture is so much of like outdoors, and we have parties, and so this is a difference that affects Brazilians probably in a unique way. But the other things that also happen, right? In terms of creating community. So the beauty here is that, we take very seriously as part of the Lemann Center is to really create activities to engage the students for free. Because we know that when you're students, it's not that you have a huge budget for a cultural event that you can spend. You're paying your rent, you're paying your food. So we provide a lot of events open to the community, and they're very diverse. Right? Some might be big events at the Credit Center, other might be smaller ones at the YMCA. This year we have 2 carnival events, for example, because it's really large part of Brazilian culture. And we always have like the other events of Brazilian culture. If they are not free, they have very low cost. So for example, this weekend we're going to have an event at Allerton Park. The cost is $25. And we are providing now even lunch during our lecture series. So students are welcome to come, have a lunch, and learn more about Brazil in an interdisciplinary way, because this may affect how they see the big problems now. They're much more global. So we take seriously to provide a community for them. We have a professor in the Portuguese department. She's very engaged with the Luso. She organized several events about cooking, so students can come and learn how to make Brazilian dishes, because even being Brazilian, sometimes they don't know how to cook. So those dishes, so they can come, cook, and eat them. So, part of that, what we call saudade, that's that lingering feeling that, you miss your country, is reduced because the activities kind of help the bridge, and connect people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And those events sound really helpful. I definitely agree with your assessment that like the low cost and free access is very important for most college students. I know some people like colder weather, but I definitely understand that too, because I get cold kind of easily. So I personally very much would prefer to live in a warmer climate if possible. But here I am. So
Yes.
So I guess the next thing that I wanted to ask about was kind of the impact about things back in Brazil. We've talked a little bit about how, policy in Brazil might impact the number of students here, but what happens here on campus a little bit. But I guess I'm curious, like, what is the impact of, this academic experience back to Brazil itself? And, do most people return to Brazil for their careers after graduate programs here, for example, or any other experience? And are there specific areas that are very critical in that impact, I guess?
Sure. So yes, even though we don't have like precise numbers, our feeling that, especially based on year after year that we have been in the center, because there's a large history before the center started, right? So we only have 15 years. But most Brazilians have to come back to Brazil, right? Or they want to come back to Brazil. Some because of their funding, some because of family or, professional needs. But so most people actually return to Brazil. This we know. For me, it was very eye-opening. We had 2 events in Brazil, one in Brasilia and one in São Paulo with alums. And it's amazing how the University of Illinois really was transformative for them. They talk about like the years that they were here with a lot of pride and like really showing like how it changed their careers, right? And they are like from academia to the industry, all the fields. Some are in the government. So we have like all the three main sectors really well represented. We have many Brazilians that, because of the connections with the College of Aces, are in the agriculture. There's a lot of relationships between Brazil. Think about the Midwest. We are surrounded by corn and soy. In Brazil, it's a big producer of corn and soy as well. So historically, we had that. But also in business and economics, because of the history also with like Werner Baer and other professors, both in the business school and in the economics department. In part, many that come for the program for the central bank, they are all economists, right? So this also brings another number of people from there. But you can actually see across the spectrum in the many, many, many areas. So it was very fulfilling to see them. And on May 22nd, if I'm not mistaken, we are helping fund an event, organizing funding event for alums and students from University of Illinois. They are visiting Brazil. So they are going on the study abroad, going to Brazil. And there will be an event with alums in Brazil. So they exchange how this experience of being here changed them. And so how the students, they are here, they're going there, can also relate to how the experience going to the other direction might be affecting their lives. So
I guess to wrap things up, in political science, sometimes people talk about like the idea of brain drain or like academics like leaving one country. And it seems to me, at least, that the Lemann Center is able to kind of, to some extent, prevent that or kind of create a more collaborative and healthy relationship between those studying abroad and elsewhere. So I guess I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that idea and ultimately what you think the impact of this center is here on campus.
Yeah, I think that is a major concern, right? And like in some specialized fields and in some countries, they really have very low numbers of people that return to the countries of origin. Like I'm Brazilian, right? And you could think, well, it's another brain drain, right? I'm married with another Brazilian that is also at the University of Illinois. And so many people there on campus. We were born in Brazil, but studied part of our lives in Brazil, but then we ended up in the United States. What is most important for me is not where you're located geographically. It's what you do for your country. So I feel that, I have returned so much more, for example, for Brazil, even being in the United States, because I had all the connections and other networks to bring students, to mentor other professors that come to visit me. And all my research, basically, like probably 80% of my portfolio is Brazil, and now I'm devoting most of my time for the Brazilian Center. So it's how you employ and how you use your time when you are abroad, right? So if you're still using it to advance the countries where we came from, I don't see it as a drag.
So we kind of concluded that conversation with Professor Andrade about brain drain and the bigger picture impact of UIUC on Latin America. And those are exactly the questions that I explored in the rest of the interview with Professor Sin. We talked about the different students and faculty that come to UIUC from Latin America, what they study, what impacts they have back in their home countries, and overall the general connection that exists between this institution and this region. So you kind of touched on a few different areas already of study, but I guess I just wanted to get a sense of like also what the levels of study are most common. Graduate students seem to be very important for the economics and the anthropology portions of this. Are most of the students from Latin America who come here graduate students, and are there other areas or aspects of the student experience that are important?
No. Students come now. Now I think from all areas, across. So we do have a master in Latin American and Caribbean studies, and we receive students coming from all over Latin America. We have many from Brazil, but we have had from all over, and we also provide fellowships for those students, but also for graduate students and that come to media, education, journalism, economics, political science, social work. I'm trying to, it's in all areas of LAS, you have students from Latin America. The associations of students from Ecuador, the association of students from Argentina, from Peru, they're really strong. They're RSOs. And they're very strong. I think the Latin American and Caribbean community is vibrant, and there is also a big group of students that come from Central America and faculty that specialize in issues. Especially, we have had many doing El Salvador, and students coming from El Salvador, from Guatemala. And again, the graduate students, given that we have more than 180 faculty affiliates to the center, and I would say that about 120 are really, really involved and do a lot of work with Latin America. So those professors establish connections in the countries that they study, and then those students come. So, now I would say there's students from all over, and also in all the subdisciplines. Business too, there's a lot of students come from the master in law, engineer, for instance, the dean of engineer is from Argentina. The dean of ACES is from Argentina. One of the deans in engineering is also from Latin America, and the dean or the director the chair of the business administration in GIS is from Venezuela. I mean, there are people from Latin America all over, and they bring in students from Latin America. So I think it grows all the time. The amount of students is just amazing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there particular challenges that you find are commonly faced by students or faculty that from Latin America that come to UIUC?
So, I mean, for students, yeah, the main problem is that of funding. So, for many PhD students get funding from their departments, but master students, for instance, that's hard. It's harder to get money for them. So we try to help in any way we can. And in fact, we have an endowment called Maria Elena Moyano, who was woman activist in Lima, Peru, who was killed by Shining Path. And so our endowment is going to start giving fellowships to non-Americans to come to to study languages, or small fellowships. And we are aiming to be able to, getting different funds and contributions to get to the point where we can offer these fellowships for students coming from Latin America. I think a problem many times is getting in PhD studies for people that are coming from lower income, that cannot go to private and expensive universities. Is much harder to put their feet in the United States because you don't have the right letters of recommendations and the connections. So coming to do a master's is a stepping stone to then be able to do a PhD. And for those students, a master's is really important. And the funding for those masters is hard to come by.
So in terms of the educational exchange, I guess I was just curious your take on why this is so important and what impacts it can have in Latin America. I know there's conversations, at least I've had people talk about this in political science, of like brain drain or other like issues that can happen. And at least when talking with Professor Andrade, this is like a way to, we talked about this a little bit as a way to prevent loss of connection between, in academia or draining of intellectual resources or anything like that. So I was just curious of your perspective on that whole conversation.
So, I mean, one of the things is that a lot of people come back to Latin America. Most people don't stay in the United States. In fact, there are some studies and that have looked at academics in political science, for instance, and looked at people that come back and people that stayed. And yes, it is related to the economic situation of the country. So, and the possibilities of becoming a professor and living of that. But for instance, Brazilians come back a lot because their universities work pretty well and they have a space. Most people that if I could go back, I would go back. My family, my friends, my life is there. So, so I don't think there's a lot of brain drain per se. People come back to Chile. People come back to Mexico. And other countries. I mean, to Argentina, a lot of people come back to the country. So I don't think that is the main problem. Now it's so easy to go back and forth, and I think people want to be in their countries, just as sometimes it's very hard. And for some people, the United States is an option. For others, it's not. But I don't think that is per se a brain drain. I think most, a majority of individuals that come to study to the United States go back to their home country. And in fact, I have to say that, for instance, some of the fellowships that the United States give to students in many countries, for instance, the Fulbright program, they have a specific clause that says you have to go back to your country for 2 years in order to prevent a brain drain. And this is one of the main fellowships people use to come to the United States.
So I guess I was interested in digging a little deeper in terms of what do you mentioned academia and going to work at universities there. What do a lot of the people educated here at the University of Illinois end up doing when they go back to Latin America? I've heard about a lot of students from economics in Brazil going to work at the central bank there. I was just wondering if you could kind of elaborate on if there are any important connections of that kind, or in areas that are very impacted by graduates of University of Illinois.
Yeah, so some of them, yes, as you mentioned, they go back to work in the central bank, and there are examples everywhere. Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Central America, but also, apart from the central bank, they do work in other type of banks, like the investment bank of the country, or or other economic institutions. Many of them work in the economic ministries of each of their country. Some of them become politicians. Probably the most is Correa, who became president. But he became president, and then some of people that have been from his cohort from other countries in Latin America went to work with him in Ecuador, for instance, things like that. But there are also people that go back and work in NGOs. So there are some that are running sections of the UNDP in their home country, or the UN in their home country. That's a pretty common. Others that we know, for instance, we just had the visitor that stay here in the United States, but working for the World Bank or the IDB. So those are also pretty common among our graduates in different areas. Many of them go back and also work in education, becoming prominent in education administration, within the Department of Education, or running universities or programs.
Yeah, I'm definitely very fascinated by the idea. I mean, I guess it shouldn't be too surprising. We're a large university. We have a lot of students that some go on to do very important roles. But I was when I first learned that Rafael Correa I went here. I thought that was really interesting, and I also found that a director of the Brazilian Central Bank had graduated from here. I don't have a super specific question about this, because I don't really know what to what to ask. But I guess I was just curious if there's anything that you see as particularly significant about either of those figures, or just generally these very prominent connections, and if that says anything in particular about UIUC's impact on Latin America.
Well, I think the impact of UIUC in Latin America is pretty strong. Those are two examples, but there are many more. The people in the central bank in Paraguay and Argentina, and people that have had prominent positions in government without becoming, the president, but still in ministries and etc. that are famous in their own country, because they are professors, but they're also public intellectuals, and are in the news all the time and things of the sort. Those are great examples. Again, and I know the case of Argentina because that's where I'm from, but one of the main law firms in Argentina is called Becar Varela, and is run by these lawyers who did their MLL here in the United States. So, for instance, things like every time I go, they ask me for swag or things like that. So I do think that the reach of the university in Latin America has been very, very extensive, and the ties are pretty strong. And there are a lot of connections. Then agriculture, for instance, where their dean is from Latin America, and a lot of their faculty are from Latin America, and they have these strong ties where they send the student, and they have these exchange programs. Argentina and other countries are very, very powerful in terms of agricultural issues. So those ties are strong. We have strong ties. I mean, people that, for instance, Inés, again, some professors from Colombia that are looking into rice and doing all their research in Colombia, and they have these ties. Or professors from architecture. One of the main architects in the world, Cesar Pelli, who built the Petronas Twin Tower in Kuala Lumpur, but then many others. He's a graduate from Illinois, so probably one of the best well-known architects in the world, who is from Argentina and graduate from here, I'll put the Cesar Pelli. So he came here, and again, these connections, and that makes a strong connection with Latin America and Argentina in terms of architecture. So I think that the amount of graduates that are from Latin America that came to Illinois and then went on to do amazing things like him. It's just, we don't really think about all of those, but it's just, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? Also, there was at least strong connections, and in fact, now we have all their archives in the university. But is another Mexican, the civil engineer program here is super strong. So this is a civil engineering that built the first towers in Mexico, which as you know, is Mexico City is like it's a city on a swamp. It was a swamp before. So that created with this new technology that prevent earthquakes from a graduate from Illinois. So the connections are super strong.
It seems like there's a big degree of diversity in terms of not just what people are doing after they graduate, of course, but also in terms of like a more narrow focus on, those who become politically influential, in terms of what kind of influence they have. I mean, obviously, Correa is known for being fairly left-wing. I imagine there are people across the spectrum who graduate here and end up having influence. I guess I was just interested to hear if you had any idea if like there is a perspective that or certain ideas that are more commonly shared by people who come out of this university, if there's anything in particular that comes to mind for you.
No, I think that's the point, that the university in itself is so diverse in terms of what it teaches and their professors, and everybody's all over the place. So I don't think there is one way or one ideology that they get here, that's what rules their world. Most people come with their own ideology, and I don't think that's the role of what the university does. People try to be, and what we all do is try to be pretty objective on the things that we study, and we do call attention about problems that are particularly important and that should be solved, but I don't think that it has a particular ideological bent to it. And I think that's part of it. I mean, many of them, especially in economics, some of the people I know are really on the right, others on the left. So I don't think I don't think it's a particular, it's not a hotbed for, communists coming here.
Yeah. So those are the two interviews I had with these professors who are both playing a very important role at UIUC today at the Lemann Center and the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I'm so thankful I was able to speak with them and get these different insights about the institutions that they represent. And I think there's some interesting differences and commonalities that we can find throughout here. We see the Lemann Center, which is more funded through private sources, whereas the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies is generally funded through public sources. We see different programs and academic exchanges that are supported by the different centers. We see different political contexts that inform them, whether that be the domestic situation in Brazil, the Cold War, which has led to the funding for the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, or other political connections that are touched on throughout this episode. But most of all, the big takeaway I get from this is just how big of an impact the University of Illinois really has. I think that this kind of just reinforced the understanding that the world is very connected, and we should take seriously every institution's role in it. Think more about how our campus connects internationally, and I hope that also led to more of you listeners being interested in Latin American politics, because it's something that I think is very important for us here in the United States. Very often, I think Americans look to Europe, and I think that there are some important comparisons there. But I think that what's interesting to me is just geographically, we are more or less part of the same continent as the rest of Latin America. Even if here in the United States we consider ourselves a little bit separate in North America, that's not how everyone else tends to see it. In most countries in Latin America, the Americas are viewed as one. And I think the level of connection the University of Illinois has with Latin America kind of further reinforces that point. I hope everyone who listens to this episode is able to draw their own conclusions about the two institutions that we talked about today, what role they have in creating the positive connections between Latin America and UIUC, and what things we might want to change in the future to make sure that our university is having a good impact on the world. Thank you so much for listening. As always, the sources will be linked in the link tree in the description of this podcast. And that's all. Bye-bye.
Learning and Labor. Station WILL has carried a special program this week giving information about the University of Illinois. If you have been a listener to these broadcasts, you have heard more or less about what the university does, how it does it, and what it hopes to do. Thank you, Dr. Willard.